Okay, hello again. I'm going to do a quick recording for you just so that we can make our way through the book, and so that when I do my live class on Thursday evening, we can effectively finish the book up by looking at the last two chapters. So in this quick video, I'm going to just go over briefly the main events and themes and characters that play out in part two or chapter two or section two of the book, The Promise. The section is called Pa, and describes the death of the father of the Swart family, whose name is also Mani, but of course everyone just calls him Pa because he's the dad. This section of the book, the time it's set in, is very important. And remember, as I've told you before, each chapter in the book is set 10 years after the previous one and is set in a specific decade of South African history. Previously it was 1985, 6. This time it's 1995, and that is a year that contains a great deal of significance for South Africa because it was about a year or so into the democratic transition into a free country and out of the apartheid system. Nelson Mandela was president of South Africa from 94, but in 95, this other big event happened, which is that South Africa hosted the 1995 Rugby World Cup, which they went on to win. It was a team led by this guy here in the picture, Francois Pienaar. And when we won, we beat the All Blacks in the final. It created this very iconic scene of this archetypal South African white male Afrikaner shaking hands in celebration with Nelson Mandela, a guy who not that long before had actually been in jail and was now president. And this image has become very famous in South African history because it represents this change, this transition into a different country. But this event plays out in this chapter of the book too. The family, uh, on the day of the funeral for Mani, for Pa, sit down and they watch this event unfold, and it seems to signal for them that there is a change afoot in the country. But what kind of change exactly is it? So it happens in the chapter where Pa dies. Now, Pa himself is kind of like a Francois Pienaar style Afrikaner male, right? He went to the right schools. He inherited this farm. He is the very definition of what it means to be a South African man of a certain era. But his death coincides with the change in the society that he was born to run and born to lead, but which has changed and has left a kind of inability for him to fill that role. And so the death of the father, the death of this kind of represents the death also of an order that's falling away and going away. And what happens now in the book is actually that the family, the Swart family, experiences this change, not necessarily as a good thing, but rather as a kind of a diminishing force. That over the course of the book now, you'll notice that the farm actually starts to shrink and get smaller, less productive. It starts to fall into decrepitude and neglect. The family stop looking after it properly. The Over the course of the book, the family and the farm will also begin to run out of money. Okay, and the surrounding farm will start getting eaten up by farm invaders, land thieves, land claims, and there's also this ongoing issue of what to do about Salome and her house. Should the family give it to them, give it to her, live up to their promise, or what's going to happen? Um, and that kind of this transition into a different kind of life for the family actually is a failure. Also, what happens over the course of the book is that more and more family members die, right? So the mom is gone, now the dad is gone, so that the parents, the old order, have died off, and the new order takes over. What are they taking over? They're taking over something that actually doesn't really belong to them. And over the course of the book is something they begin to lose, this farm. And the farm kind of stands in as a metaphor for their role in the world, their power in the world, which is leaking away and being taken away from them. So the book is playing around with this kind of foundation myth of a new South Africa, but showing that the transition doesn't really work for everybody. The transition comes with a cost, and maybe it's a good cost. Maybe it's the right thing to do, but it does have a human experience behind it. Okay. The other thing is that in this chapter that the country has profoundly changed, right? There's been a transition, a handover of power. There's also this other thing going on in the book where the transition doesn't necessarily bring change. Everything, although things are very different, things kind of remain the same. And that's also a theme throughout the book, that despite all of these upheavals and political tumult, a lot of the old South Africa pulls through into the present moment and stubbornly remains behind as a problem that the characters have to face, but which also plays out over their current experience of life. So things do change, but things also kind of remain the same. Nonetheless, at the human scale, at the experience of the individual family members, we see that the new South Africa brings with it all kinds of opportunities, but also all kinds of new problems that they fail to deal with properly. The number one being, now that the laws have changed, the laws of the land have changed, what are we going to do about Salumi's house? What happens to her? And that promise keeps on getting deferred and delayed and not lived up to, all the way up until the end of the book when it's finally sorted out, but in a very ambiguous and for Salome problematic way. So she's an interesting character too. How she exists in the book is not as a central character at all, but rather a kind of a figure on the margins, on the side. At some point, Amoy is sitting on the kopje towards the end of the book, and she looks out of the farm and she sees how, actually in this chapter is where this happens. She looks out over the farm and thinks about how the laws of the land have changed. And she looks at Salome's house, and it's all the way on the edge of the farm. So Salome is like very much a character who physically, in the places of the book, is always on the extremes. She's out there far away. She's kept far hence from the family. And I mean, they could have just built a quarters for her to live in so that she'd come to the house easily, but they didn't. Over time, they haven't wanted her in the house. So she's always been a figure physically in the book, in the places she inhabits, who's sort of on the borders, far away, not in the center. And even though the book is actually, the title of the book is a promise to her, she's not very much of a strong figure in the book. She's not a recurring figure. She doesn't have much dialogue or action. She doesn't really feature in many scenes. And my research shows that Galgut, the author, did that on purpose. You want to make her feel like she was a marginalized character, and that the promise isn't necessarily so much about her, but is rather an examination of the family's failure to navigate the changes that they experience into the new South Africa. And you can also see this as it plays out with how the land, the very physical geography of the farm, begins to change. Namely, it changes, as I said earlier, in negative ways. It gets smaller, it becomes neglected, it starts being productive, and it stops being productive and fertile. It's not a source of income for the family. It actually becomes like an albatross. And at the end of the book, it's basically going to be turned into something that's no longer a farm at all, right? So this whole way of life, this whole order has simply been gobbled up by a new system that's come in and rendered them, in a sense, powerless. But the question is, like the moral question, is that a good thing? Is that what should happen? This family, after all, benefited from a system for a long time. When the system changes and they don't know how to handle it, well, that's kind of their own fault, many would say. But also the book grapples with the failure of the transition, the change, to be good for everybody, full stop. So we look at these images now and we look at them with nostalgia. They're part of the foundational myth of South Africa, of this new South Africa. But as we look around us today, what is left of that founding mythology? Does it still work? Is it still something people believe in, or have we grown cynical and hardened our hearts against that? It's a question also dealt with by the end of the book. So the book is not trying to sugarcoat anything about South Africa. It's not trying to be a kind of brochure to persuade people that the place is something that it's not. As I've said a few times, it's trying to look at what's really going on, what's happening beneath the surface. In the last lecture on Thursday evening, I will cover the last two chapters of the book, which are called Astrid and Anton. In other words, what happens is the family is going to shrink down to just one person left by the end of the book, which is Amor. And what is she going to do with the farm? What is she going to do with the land? The land being this metaphor for all the power that they once held in their society. The land being, the farm being that stand in for the nation or the state. The state of the farm represents the state of the country. The farm is strong, the country is strong. Well, by the end, the farm has all but disappeared. So what is Galgut trying to say through that metaphor? We'll cover it on Thursday evening. I will see you then. Until Thursday evening, stay well and chat to you soon.